Donald Marshall, a respected member of the Mi'kmaq First Nation, was actually caught breaking Canadian commercial fishing laws. In a system that guarantees equal protection under the law for every citizen, this should have been an open and shut criminal case. If you break the rules, you pay the fine. Yet the Supreme Court of Canada looked at the exact same facts and dropped the charges completely. The court ruled that Marshall was legally permitted to fish without a license. If a non-Indigenous citizen stood right next to him and did the exact same thing, they would be arrested. This decision highlights a specific tension in the legal system: how a constitution that guarantees equal protection for all citizens can simultaneously accommodate a separate set of rules for specific groups. This tension originates from a single document, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, cemented into the Constitution in 1982. Most of us are familiar with the first half of this document, which outlines individual rights. These are the universal guarantees of free speech, religion, and equal treatment that apply to every single citizen, regardless of their background. But the Constitution contains a second, lesser-known half. It outlines what are known as collective rights. Collective rights do not belong to everyone. They are exclusive, specialized legal protections granted only to specific groups of people within the country. Understanding why Marshall walked free requires looking at why Canada decided that treating everyone exactly the same wouldn't actually result in a fair society. Individual rights function as the legal baseline of Canadian society. They empower the single citizen against the overreach of the state. But even these universal rights have boundaries. A clause known as Section 1 allows the government to place reasonable limits on personal freedoms to protect the broader public. For example, you have freedom of expression, but that right hits a hard stop if you use it to spread hate speech. You have freedom of assembly, but only if your protest remains peaceful. The moment your actions endanger others, Section 1 steps in. This system protects the public from dangerous individuals, but it does little to protect vulnerable minority groups from the will of the majority. Universal individual equality is blind. It treats everyone identically in the present moment, but it ignores the entrenched systemic discrimination that shaped the past. That brings us to the groups who hold collective rights in Canada: Indigenous peoples, comprising First Nations, Inuit and Métis, and official language minorities, specifically English and French speakers. These rights serve as a legal countermeasure to assimilation policies that once threatened to erase these distinct cultures entirely. For Indigenous peoples, this history involves the trauma of residential schools. The state forced Indigenous children into institutions designed to strip away their traditions, punish them for speaking their native languages, and replace their culture with European beliefs. Correcting that damage requires a prolonged struggle for recognition. The Métis people, for instance, had to form their own national councils and fight for decades just to be officially recognized as an Indigenous group under the 1982 Constitution. Francophone communities faced a different kind of pressure. They led a fierce fight to maintain their language rights in government buildings and public schools, ensuring their culture wouldn't be swallowed by a predominantly English-speaking North America. Collective rights were engineered specifically for preservation, a way to repair historical damage and guarantee that these founding cultures survive into the future. Armed with this historical context, we can return to the Donald Marshall fishing case. To a non-Indigenous fisherman watching from the shore, Marshall's exemption looks like an unfair loophole that violates the rule of law. Marshall's right to fish freely is a constitutionally protected collective right, rooted in his Mi'kmaq heritage and his ancestors' historical survival on that land. Enforcing identical licensing rules on everyone would effectively punish Indigenous peoples by criminalizing their traditional way of life. True fairness in a democracy sometimes requires us to treat people differently. Leveling the playing field can require specific rules to offset the deep disadvantages of the past. The two halves of the Canadian Charter function as a single, dual-layered system. Individual rights act as a shield. They protect your freedom to be yourself, regardless of what group you belong to. Collective rights act as an anchor. They protect the group itself, ensuring that the diverse communities that founded the nation aren't erased by the majority. Canada's Constitution operates as a deliberate balancing act. It demonstrates that a society is only truly just when it protects both the freedom of the individual and the survival of the collective.